The story's complete clickbait, dude. Your car's not going to last forever. You're not going to last forever. Neither am I. The world's not going to last forever. Not even the universe is going to last forever. It's all just kind of temporary, so make the most of it. And don't shoot the messenger. If you got a problem with that, take it up with the second law of thermodynamics, which was coded by God herself, who apparently thought it might be fun to turn everything into a clock. But while we're down here in the sewer of bare-knuckle physics, it might be fun to pile some fresh manure on those Mensa candidates over at drive.com.au who came up with the novel concept of your forever car ingeniously in the first place, and then tried, largely unsuccessfully, I would argue, to explain how that, and of course combustion, actually works. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au. New cars cheap, but Australia only. Website. Card. Drive has a problem, aside from understanding how engines actually work, personal opinion. So you're there browsing online, you click on some story from Drive, or you think you're reading a story, a report, right, from a journalist. But to Drive, it's just there, inflicting advertising upon you. The ads come neatly wrapped in some story, but to Drive, I'd argue, the ads are the main game, the shiny new toy. Nobody actually gives a shit about the wrapping at the end of the day. The wrapping can be properly crap. A 2024 report by Super Cheap Auto has found that 3 in 10 Australians, 30%, who actually rely on a mechanic to change their engine oil admit they're likely to work on their own vehicle in the future. Okay, so this forever car idea is one of those dubious stories that originated with a press release. So it comes pre-packaged, which is the best kind if you've got to crank out 10 of these space fillers every day. Super Cheap probably thought it was a grand idea indeed to shift the narrative neatly away from the recent inconvenient $50 million lawsuit orbiting the parent company Super Retail Group's former CEO, Anthony T, and his highly entertaining alleged conduct, which includes, putting it diplomatically, very close ties indeed to the HR boss internally, if you know what I mean, plus a little bullying, some victimisation, and general, what I would categorise as high-level Kim Jong-un-esque managerial conduct. Although I am, to be fair, pretty certain that he never actually put anyone to death on the job. Just made them wish for it endlessly, Monday to Friday. If those allegations are true, and they're just allegations at this point, it must be emphasised, $50 million allegations. Those friggin' lawyers. Explains a lot, doesn't it? The lawyers always from A to B with that little teepee in their trousers. Wonder why. Even the chicks. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's DEI all the way here lately in the Fat Cave, I'll have you know. So, as a bad press countermeasure, Super Cheap does a super cheap bullshit survey and Drive is on it, baby, like Oprah on a baked ham. Like, hey, we can wrap a shizer ton of ads around that one. And they helpfully clarified right up the start that 3 in 10 Australians is 30%. Thanks for that. Actually, when you think about that at a deep level, it says kind of a lot about what Drive actually thinks of its readers, seemingly. So, Drive neatly employs Super Cheap's hasty bullshit as the wrapping for no less than 13 ads. 13, dude. A baker's dozen, count them. I did, and I have to say, one shoe had to come off. Like, 13 ads, Jesus. Dude, if I were you, instead of having 13 ads inflicted upon me indiscriminately by those mother lovers, I'd much prefer just to sit here and watch a brilliantly crafted sponsored video integration which is drowning in meticulously chosen, hand-picked hotties. This report is sponsored by Saily, the new eSIM app backed by Nord Security. Saily is an awesome solution for staying connected without incurring those dreaded roaming charges. More at saily.com/AEJC. As a journalist, I've been basically everywhere and I've had the sky-high roaming bills to prove it. But you can sidestep those with Saily. Just select the country you're heading to, choose a data plan, download the Saily app and activate the plan before you leave. When you arrive, you step off the aircraft completely connected. A couple of clicks is all it takes. No need to sprint for a hotspot. Saily just works. Go to saily.com/AEJC now. You'll get 15% off. You'll never have to stand in a queue for a SIM card again, and you'll be seamlessly connected back home. Link in the description. Saily is available in over 150 countries. It's Android and iOS compatible. There's 24/7 chat support. And if you later discover that your device is not eSIM compatible, you will get a full refund. An eSIM is simple. The app plus your device's hardware creates a virtual SIM inside your phone or a tablet or smartwatch, so there's no need to install a physical SIM for every country that you plan on visiting. Go to saily.com/AEJC now and use promo code AEJC to get that 15% off. Stay connected when you travel and slash that dreaded roaming bill as well. You can trust Saily. It's brought to you by Nord Security. I must say they do all look quite healthy, don't they? The casting, it takes forever. Kind of like how long Drive thinks your car might last if you follow their advice. Aesthetically pleasing was right at the core of the casting process, I'll have you know. And I'm all about the casting, dude. Plenty of lost wax in this one too. We use the most sophisticated process. Just saying, no stone was left unturned. Not too hot, That was kind of important. Kind of like the Channel 9 weather girl, when you think about it, like Goldilocks hot. So, the tips in this, that's not funny, so-called report of advertising wrapping are: do your servicing on time, look at your oil, that's important, use the right oil, agreed, keep using your car, yeah, otherwise it's just furniture, isn't it? Use the right fuel, plus, quote, choose your engine carefully, and, quote, embrace the simple life, whatever the fuck that means. Change how you drive, and finally, make sure you wash your car. To me, that's just a shit sandwich with no bread. And I so wanted that forever car too. That's why I clicked, dude. I'm actually pretty sure that even if you did all of those things recommended, no matter how tightly the simple life got embraced, for example, even with the zeal of a freaking squad of samurais, your car's still going to just wear out roughly as fast as everyone else's. But it's just the wrapping, right? The ads were awesome, those ads. Ford, Mitsubishi, Pajero Sport, Fiverr, and Temu, whatever, tomato. Who doesn't want that? Temu was quite keen to sell me a 5-pack of cargo pants for under $70. Imagine that. Very little risk of disease, as I understand it. Hashtag Doug Mulray, he was God. And some very nice knitted shoes as well, I know. I looked at those ads and thought to myself, I'll have to stop sniffing glue before I browse online in the evenings. Perhaps. Anyway, Drive's wrapping was written here by a dude named Zane Doby. Now, I'm sure Mr. Doby tried really, really hard, but let us take a look at the quote-unquote advice he gave the public in point number 5, use the rated fuel, which is kind of important in a broad sort of context. According to Z-Dobe, who I would name in that way if I were his agent, that would be his rap name, and that's rap with a W today, obviously, because the business he's in. Just like, Look at him, dude. He appears to be wearing one of those string ties. Timu never offered me one of those. And the wrapping business, obviously, so tough, particularly with a string tie. Unless Boss Hogg, I would argue, and Daisy Duke are coming to town, we'd have to find Z-Dobe something a little more appropriate, wouldn't we? A nice edgy T-shirt, perhaps, and a cap with a big Z on the front, like if he wants to look credible online. When you've got the formula, dude, why fuck with perfection? Z-Lord, that would be an upgrade. Anyway, Z-Dobe wrote, and I'm just going to dump it all on you now, premium fuel, this is a quote, premium fuel is not a myth. Agreed, Z-Dobe. Premium fuel exists. It's ontologically objective, so well done. Sub-editing is freaking dead, obviously. Quote, if your car is rated to use premium fuel, then you must fuel up with that. And I'd say, yeah, that's broadly a good idea, but in a pinch, you could, of course, use E10 and just drive kind of gently until you can get premium. E10 is typically like 94 RON. The NOx sensor's going to sort it out as long as you don't drag race or try to set the lap record at Mount Panorama in your freaking GT3. And then he goes, blah, blah, blah. Basically, the higher the octane rating, the more stable the fuel. I had to think about that one. Octane rating is a measure of one thing, right? And one thing only, I'd suggest. It's a measure of a fuel's resistance to auto-ignition. So, a high octane rating means a fuel has greater ability to resist auto-ignition caused by temperature and compression/pressure in the chamber inside the engine, and just wait for the spark to make it burn rather than just going off early and detonating. That's what octane rating is. And if that's stability, then okay, but I'd argue that chemically, all petrol is intrinsically pretty frickin' stable stuff. Like, you have to really, really, really try to get it to burn, don't you? That's why the spark plug is there. If it was easy, we wouldn't need one. Nitroglycerin, I'd argue, is unstable. Mercury 2 fulminate is unstable, which hardly anyone knew until Bryan Cranston as Walter White so famously blew the shit out of that apartment with it in Breaking Bad. Although, I would have to say, for technical reasons, it would not have happened quite like that. The crystal was a bit big. You wouldn't touch a crystal of that shit quite as big as that. Anyway, there's lots of unstable stuff. Lead azide and tetrazine, quite unstable. Don't play with that. Petrol, on the other hand, as long as you're not a complete prat, pretty frickin' stable. The octane scale is actually a measure of knock resistance, where the standard for 0 is this chemical called N-heptane, and 100 up the other end of the scale is 2,2,4-trimethylpentane, which is a particular flavour of octane, the chemical, like an isomer of octane. So 95 RON is 95% of the way from N-heptane to 2,2,4-trimethylpentane, which is also called isooctane, if you're looking it up, in terms of knock resistance, when it's tested in a particular laboratory engine at a particular speed. It's the research octane number test. If you see the RON for RON, it's that test. There's a different test, which is only slightly different, for the motor octane number, or MON. And then there's the frickin' Americans, who use a thing called the anti-knock index for their fuel ratings, which is the numeric average of the RON and the MON, which makes it so confusing, especially if you're looking at the owner's manual for a American car. Don't get the ratings confused, because they're not going to work here. Anyway, Z-Dobe goes on, wrapping. When a more volatile fuel such as 91 is used, it can detonate at different rates, creating an explosion too early and doing something called knocking or pinging, depending on how aggressively early the fuel has detonated. Okay, so I would argue here that volatility is kind of irrelevant to this process. That's really just a measure of how eagerly something evaporates if you happen to spill it all over the floor or something. Like acetone, really volatile. Water, a bit volatile, but nothing like acetone. Kind of like that. The two processes that really matter in combustion are called deflagration and detonation. Deflagration is what you want in your engine. That's a kind of progressive combustion that starts with the spark from the spark plug and spreads rapidly but kind of smoothly at exactly the right time through the combustion chamber, but in a progressive and predictable way. That's what you want. Detonation, on the other hand, is a rapid, somewhat random explosion characterized by a supersonic shock wave, like a grenade versus a blowtorch kind of thing. Grenades detonate and blowtorches deflagrate. Well, actually the torches don't deflagrate, but the propane or the acetylene passing through them absolutely does. The shock wave from detonation is what pinging is. That's what knock sensors just sit there in your engine and listen for. It occurs spontaneously, this knocking, when the fuel's tolerance for compression and temperature is exceeded, and that happens before the plug fires and the combustion event, the planned one at least, actually begins. I'm not sure the actual rate of detonation ever actually changes that much. When it happens, and it happens very quickly. Using the word explosion in the context of combustion when it comes to engines and things of this nature really doesn't help. Low-speed explosions are deflagrations. High-speed explosions with supersonic shock waves are detonations. There's really just controlled combustion happening in your engine, deflagration, and out-of-control detonation, which can be severe, I guess, or mild, but it's generally bad when detonation happens. A knock event will occur because your piston is not at the optimal height in its up and down stroke. While the piston is still travelling with an upward force, the explosion happening too early will attempt to force the piston back down when it's not ready. No, dude, I don't see it that way. Detonation events occur because the temperature and pressure, like the combination of those two things, are too high for the fuel to withstand in the moment. In an engine, all combustion starts before the piston gets to the top of its stroke. That's just how they roll, okay? We don't actually talk about the height of the piston in its up and down stroke. We talk about the number of degrees of crankshaft rotation before the piston gets to the top of its stroke, or top dead center, okay? That's pretty simple. Combustion is precisely timed, usually by a feedback loop and predictive countermeasures in a modern engine. The spark plug has to fire well before the piston gets to top dead center. I'm going to say, just pulling numbers out of my arse here, 10 to 40 degrees of crank rotation before top dead center. That's called the advance. Like 40 degrees early is more advanced than 10. That's how this works. Earlier, like in advance, that's what the advance is. That's so the burning process gets cracking and has time to get to the maximum cylinder pressure just as the piston passes over the top dead center, and the rapidly expanding gas mixture caused by the combustion process does all it can at that point, pushing the piston down and developing torque at the crank, which is, after all, what it's there for. At 6,000 RPM, 40 degrees of advance means just over 1 millisecond between the plug firing and the piston getting to top dead center. You can't think that fast, dude, or at least I know I can't, but the engine control computer can, and that's kind of all that matters. So you want the pressure to peak right at the top so that the crank can extract the maximum amount of work from the expanding gas mixture before it expels itself when the exhaust valve opens. Now, this is a bit of a pro tip, okay? When you're taught about engines, it's like suck, squeeze, bang, and blow, like inlet, compression, ignition, exhaust. Suck, squeeze, bang, and blow. Much easier to remember. And we're taught, when it comes to blowing, suck, squeeze, bang, and blow, like exhaust, we're kind of taught that the piston pushes the exhaust out the exhaust port, right? It doesn't work like that. The exhaust just jumps out of the exhaust port. The piston does not actually push it out, and this actually saves the engine from losing power by functioning as a pump. And it's largely successful, although engines do still incur things called pumping losses. This business in drives rapping about, quote, while the piston is still travelling with upward force. That's just nonsense, dude. When the piston is approaching top dead centre, it is clearly travelling up but slowing down because it is just about to stop, isn't it? Albeit briefly. Therefore, any force acting on the piston, the net force acting on the piston has to be downwards, doesn't it? Because it's slowing down. The piston is travelling up, but the force is down. It cannot slow down any other way, said Isaac freaking Newton. A knock event happens when the fuel auto-ignites before the spark plug fires, right? Or I guess technically before the flame front of combustion gets to the bit that knocks. Okay, so that might be a subtle distinction, but the thing to remember is that detonation is a kind of violent event, whereas normal combustion is more or less smooth and progressive. Detonation also happens too early in the process, like too far before top dead centre. Drives rapping claims that detonation tries to push the piston back down in the bore instead of allowing it to come up. And I guess, that's vaguely true, but it's kind of beside the point. It's the violence of the detonation process that breaks things. Detonation is actually more thermodynamically efficient than deflagration, but the violence of that process overwhelms the safe load limits of the parts like the pistons, and it shatters them, especially if it happens to occur at like wide open throttle and huge revs against a balancing load. At best, this will cause your engine to lose performance, run rough and vibrate a lot. At worst, it will cause a knocking noise, bend the connecting rod from your piston to your crankshaft, melt the piston, or even cause your piston to expel itself from your engine block. Okay, so loss of performance. Not really caused by knocking. It's only an indirect effect, I'd suggest. If you run low-octane fuel in a high-octane engine, like an engine that's tuned for high-octane fuel, the knock sensor and other feedback mechanisms in the engine control loop will hear the knock and then intervene and retard the timing, change the fuel delivery, throttle back, whatever, and try their hardest to prevent knock and thereby protect the engine. This is going to reduce the performance. It's like a self-protection mechanism, but it's not the knock reducing the performance. It's the control system intervention. In practice, all engines run right on the cusp of knock almost all of the time. They keep walking up to the line and putting their toes over. That's how they roll. The knock sensors are little piezoelectric microphones, and all they do until the forever clock just closes on them for that final fateful time, all they do is listen for incipient knock, and then they scream at the engine control unit to retard the timing or whatever. Then the ECU keeps creeping up with the ignition advance. Once again, it keeps creeping up and up and up until it gets screamed at again by the knock sensor, and then it backs off. And this process happens dozens of times every second. It's just how engines work. Low-level knock happens all the time, and it does not matter. If an engine knocks at high power outputs, however, for a sustained period, it's likely to overheat the piston, which is then going to shatter because the high heat degrades the piston's load-bearing ability. And when that occurs, that's kind of a disaster, obviously. You're not going to miss it, in other words. Moderate knock, I suppose it can erode the crown of the piston, kind of like sandblasting over time. They actually look like that. If you pull them apart, you can see this sandblasting kind of effect on them, and straight away that screams moderate knock. Now, moderate knock, eroding the piston like that, is going to fill your oil with metal particles, and it might block various oil galleries as well. So there are multiple modes of failure that could occur as a result of that. But in the event of a real high-level knock, catastrophic failure, knock is really unlikely to bend a conrod. Like, if the piston seizes in the bore, the rod might break and then it might punch a hole in the side of the block, like the loose bit still attached to the crankshaft, in the death throes of the engine, might just go straight through the side of the block. And I'd suggest that that's a really easy fault to diagnose. Oil all over the road, fist-sized hole in the block. The roadside assistance guy always gets that one right within seconds. But it's not the knock that breaks the rod or bends it in that case. It's the fact that the piston jammed in the frickin' bore, so the rod end connected to the piston just kind of stopped moving problematically, while the connected one, the bit that's connected to the crank, actually kept going. Not sure about the piston being expelled, like expelling itself from the engine block either. Like, there's a cylinder head on top, so it's not going through that. And the actual bore itself is quite robust, certainly more robust than the piston. So I guess if the piston shatters, it might fall into the crankcase where it might get, further pureed until deafening silence ensues, and it composes some, indignant claim for damages, not unlike those claimants at Super Retail Group. Look, the reason we're here discussing this, okay, is just that if you read Z-Dobe's rapping about forever cars and fuel, whatever, you went to Temu and you bought the cargo pants and those knitted shoes, which looked great after the third sniff on the glue pot, whatever, I just wanted to put some context out there about octane and knock and the technicalities of how engines actually work, right? I'm sure he tried pretty hard, but it seems to me the median Australian motoring journalist just seems to think by default that this techo stuff is roughly as easy as reviewing a car. How hard can it be? I'd suggest it's really not that easy at all. And I don't know about you, but I am kind of sick, like in a vague way, of 4 out of 10 being categorised as a win for ambient online journalism.